It's easy to believe that some lives are simply perfect. From the outside, everything about her seemed effortless, graceful, elegant, untouched by struggle. The world saw a woman who moved through life with quiet confidence, someone who embodied beauty in its purest form. But what if that image was only half the truth? What if behind that calm exterior was a story shaped not by perfection but by survival, heartbreak, and a search for something that always seemed just out of reach? Because for all the admiration she received, her life followed a very different pattern, one that repeated itself again and again. Love would begin with hope, grow into something meaningful, and then somehow it would fall apart. And yet, through all of it, there was one connection, one person who stayed in her heart long after everything else had faded. But to understand why, you have to go back to where it all began. She was born far from the bright lights that would one day define her. Her early years weren't rooted in stability or comfort, but in constant movement. Different cities, different surroundings, never quite settling in one place long enough to feel secure. On the surface, it looked like an unusual but privileged childhood. She learned quickly, adapted easily, and by the time she was still very young, she could speak multiple languages with ease. But beneath that polished exterior, something much darker was taking shape. Her parents were deeply involved in political ideologies that would later become some of the most destructive forces in modern history. At first, it may have seemed distant, something happening elsewhere. But over time, it crept closer, shaping the environment around her in ways she couldn't yet understand. Then, without warning, everything broke apart. Her father walked away. No long explanation. No comforting goodbye. Just absence. That moment stayed with her, not as a memory that faded, but as a wound that never fully healed. Years later, she would still describe it as the most painful experience of her life. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. The silence, the abandonment, the feeling of being left behind without knowing why. And that feeling followed her. She was sent away to school, where she watched other children reunite with their families while she waited for someone who never came. Each passing holiday made the reality clearer. He wasn't coming back. Then, just as she was trying to make sense of that loss, the world itself began to unravel. War arrived. At first, there was hope that she would be safe. A move to another country seemed like an escape, a chance to stay out of harm's way. But that illusion didn't last long. Within a year, everything changed. Soldiers filled the streets. Fear replaced normal life. What had once felt like a refuge became something else entirely. A trap. Daily life became unpredictable. There was no certainty, no timeline, no clear end. People told themselves it would be over soon, weeks, maybe months. But time stretched on, and hope became something fragile, something people clung to because they had nothing else. To survive, she had to disappear. She took on a new name, blending in as best she could, trying not to draw attention to herself. But even that wasn't enough to escape the reality around her. There were moments when the danger felt immediate, when hiding in silence became the only option, the sound of footsteps above, distant gunfire, the constant awareness that everything could change in an instant. And then the war reached her family directly. Loss became personal. 2 of her relatives were taken and executed. Just like that. No warning. No chance to say goodbye. Something shifted in her after that. Until then, she had tried to remain invisible, believing that staying quiet was the safest way to survive. But now, silence didn't feel like enough. She began to take risks, small at first, but dangerous all the same. Carrying messages, delivering information, doing whatever she could to help, even knowing the consequences if she were caught. She was still so young. And yet, in the middle of all that fear, she found a way to hold onto something else. Dance. Before the war, it had been her dream. A future she imagined for herself, something beautiful and full of possibility. Now it became something different, not just an escape, but a form of resistance. She performed in secret gatherings, raising money and lifting spirits in a time when hope was scarce. But even those moments came with rules. No applause, not because the performances weren't appreciated, but because even the smallest sound could give them away. So the audience sat in silence, smiling instead. It was a strange kind of beauty, art existing in complete stillness, shared without a single word. But survival came at a cost. As the war dragged on, conditions worsened. Food became scarce. Winters grew harsher. Hunger wasn't just a discomfort, it became a constant presence. Families did what they could to survive, even turning to things they would never have considered before. Her health suffered. Weakness, illness, exhaustion, it all became part of daily life. And when the war finally ended, the shift felt almost unreal. Relief didn't come all at once. It arrived in small moments. A simple gesture. A piece of food offered by someone who had more than you did. For her, one of those moments stood out, a single act of kindness that symbolized the return of life itself. And with that came something else. A chance to start again. She moved forward with determination, returning to the dream she had held onto through everything. Dance once again became her focus. She trained, pushed herself, worked toward the future she had imagined for so long. But reality had changed. Years of hardship had taken their toll. Others were ahead, stronger, more prepared, and eventually she had to face something she never thought she would. That dream was slipping away. It was a painful realization, one she had carried through war, through loss, through survival itself. And now, in a time of peace, it was no longer possible. But she didn't stop. Instead, she adapted. Acting wasn't the original plan. It wasn't even something she pursued out of passion at first. It was practical. It offered stability, a way to move forward. But quietly, something began to change. What started as a necessity slowly became something more. An opportunity. Her early roles were small, but they led to something bigger. A moment of recognition. Someone noticing what others hadn't yet seen. And then, almost suddenly, everything shifted. She was given a chance. A role that would introduce her to the world in a way she never expected. A performance that felt natural, effortless, and completely different from what audiences were used to at the time. And just like that, she became something more than an actress. She became a symbol. But success didn't erase the past. Even as her career grew, her personal life followed a familiar pattern. Relationships that began with hope but didn't last the way she wished they would. Each one shaped by something deeper, an unspoken need for stability, for connection, for something that felt secure. She wanted a family. That desire remained constant, even as everything else changed around her. But that path wasn't easy. There were moments of joy, but also loss. Experiences that left a lasting impact, shaping how she approached both love and life. Over time, she stepped back from the spotlight. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. After everything she had experienced, what mattered most had become clear. Fame, recognition, success, none of it meant as much as the life she wanted to build away from it all. A quieter existence, something real, something lasting. And for a while, she tried to find that. But life had a way of repeating patterns. Relationships that seemed promising revealed cracks over time. Trust was tested. Stability once again felt uncertain. And with each experience, the contrast between what she hoped for and what she found became harder to ignore. Still, she kept moving forward. Eventually, she stepped away once more, not to escape, but to find something she had been searching for all along. Peace. She found it in a place far removed from everything she had known before. A quiet environment where she could exist without constant attention, where she could simply be herself without expectation or pressure. And then, unexpectedly, love found her again. This time it was different. There was no rush, no overwhelming intensity, just understanding. Two people who had lived enough to know what truly mattered. Their connection wasn't built on grand gestures, but on something steadier, something real. For the first time, it felt like she wasn't searching anymore. And as her life settled into that calm, something else began to take shape. A new purpose. Her past, the experiences she had lived through, the struggles she had endured, had never truly left her. But now, they became something she could use to help others. She spoke about what she had seen, what she had felt, and what it meant to survive. Not as a performer, but as someone who understood. Her work took her to places where people faced challenges she knew all too well. Hunger, fear, uncertainty. And in those moments, she wasn't defined by fame or success, but by empathy. It became one of the most important parts of her life. But even then, there were things left unresolved. The past has a way of lingering, especially when it comes to the people who shaped it. And for her, one relationship had never fully closed. Her father. After years of distance, she found him again, not as the figure she had remembered, but as someone changed by time and circumstance. The reunion wasn't what she had imagined. There was no emotional moment, no sense of closure, just reality. And yet, despite everything, she chose forgiveness. Not because it erased the past, but because it allowed her to move forward. In her final years, she faced something she couldn't control. Illness. It arrived quietly at first, then revealed itself as something far more serious. The kind of diagnosis that changes everything. And yet, she met it the same way she had faced so many challenges before. With calm. There was no dramatic reaction, no outward fear. Just acceptance. A quiet understanding of what was ahead. Her final wish was simple. To go home. To return to the place where she had found peace, surrounded by the people who mattered most. And with the help of those close to her, that wish was granted. She spent her final days not in the spotlight, but in stillness. And when the time came, she left the world the same way she had lived much of her life, gracefully, quietly, without needing attention. But her story didn't end there, because what she left behind wasn't just a legacy of film or fame. It was something deeper. A life that showed how strength can exist alongside vulnerability, how beauty can come from struggle, and how, even in the face of loss, it's possible to keep searching for something better. And in the end, perhaps that's what defined her most. Not perfection, but resilience.